Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. We'll still have a few folks trickling in, so I'll talk a little slow on this intro to give them a chance so they don't miss any of this great conversation tonight. But for those of you in the virtual room tonight, welcome to Atlanta History Center's virtual author talk series. I'm Claire Haley, Vice President of Public Relations and Programs for Atlanta History Center. It is absolutely my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event featuring Kelly Weill. She will be discussing her new book, Off the Edge: Flat Earthers, Conspiracy Culture, and Why People Will Believe Just About Anything, right? So thank you for being here again. As Kelly and Vegas are talking this evening, if you have questions for them, you'll be able to drop those into the Q&A. We'll save about 15 minutes for the end, and they will do their best to get to as many of your questions as they can. If you haven't yet purchased your copy of Off the Edge, I highly encourage you to do so. You can get it online at Atlanta History Center's museum shop, 25% off tonight only. We offer domestic U.S. shipping and free in-store pickup. And your purchase helps us continue to support authors and to host these great online events for you. I'm going to briefly introduce both of tonight's guests, and then without further ado, we'll get started. Tonight's featured author is Kelly Weill. She is a journalist at the Daily Beast, where she covers extremism, disinformation, and the internet. As a leading media voice on the role of online conspiracy theories in current affairs, she has discussed flat Earth and other digital fringes on ABC's Nightline, CNN, Al Jazeera, and other national and international news outlets. She currently lives in New York. She will be in conversation this evening with Vegas Tenold. Vegas is an award-winning journalist and correspondent for Vice. He has covered the far right in America for years, as well as human rights in Russia, conflict in Central Africa, the Middle East, and national security. And he is the author of the book, Everything You Love Will Burn: Inside the Rebirth of White Nationalism in America, which was published by Bold Type Books in 2018. He was born and raised in Norway and also lives in New York, but in Brooklyn. So Vegas and Kelly, thank you both so much for joining us tonight, and I'm going to turn it over to Vegas.
Thank you, Claire. Hello, everyone who I assume is out there. Kelly, this is such a treat to be able to pick your brain about all this weird stuff that hopefully might help us understand a little bit more about what's going on these days and what's been happening with us for the last few years as well. First off, I just wanted to do like a little housekeeping. What do flat earthers believe? Like, I get that they believe that the earth is flat, but as I understand it from your book, there's some differing opinions about, there's some nuances. For instance, what happens at the end of the world, for instance. So maybe just like talk us through their belief system a little bit for those who haven't read the book yet.
Absolutely. So flat Earth theory does sound really self-explanatory, but there are some deviations and nuances across the theory. The overall belief is that we live on a frisbee-shaped Earth, totally flat, shaped like a disc, and it has a ring of ice around the outside. And there are variations to that theory. Most people these days believe that there's also a dome over the top of the Earth. It's almost like a big snow globe that we live in. And there are even variations within that. They can't quite decide what exactly gravity is. Most of them don't believe in gravity. So some believe that it's a matter of differences in buoyancy that are keeping us from floating off the Earth, whereas others believe that Earth is accelerating upwards and that's what's keeping us down, is the G-force. So there are definitely nuances. You also asked about the edge, and some people believe there's an ice wall stopping us from going over, and others believe that it's infinite until proven otherwise.
I mean, that seems like you can check. You know, if there's an end to the world, you could presumably go there, right? So have people tried? Are we working on this?
They have, and this is a almost a philosophical question for flat earthers. Well, if Earth is finite and it ends at this ice wall, why don't you go look at it? And they have various excuses for why they don't. They'll say that the ice wall is guarded by all the armies of the world. There's a big conspiracy to stop you from going to the wall. Or I've spoken to multiple people who said they're fundraising to go to the edge of the Earth, that they will do it someday. And all that's keeping them from it is just a lack of funds and a lack of gear. So, there are various degrees of initiative within the movement. And I will say various degrees of excuses for why people aren't going there.
We could spend all night just like doing the minutia of this conspiracy theory because it's amazing and I love it. But okay, I want to talk about some big picture stuff first. I remember when you first told me about your idea about writing a book about the flat earth movement. This was years ago, and it was a wild time in our country, right? There were neo-Nazis on the street, there were conspiracy theories seemingly everywhere, and the internet was the worst place ever. And of course, it was your ungrateful task to sift through it. But I'm curious what it was amid all this weirdness that made you choose flat earthers.
I think I chose flat earthers because they were almost the strangest thing that you could believe in, flat earth theory, that is. And it's one thing to believe conspiracy theories like chemtrails in the sky or fluoride in the water. It's another thing to believe the earth is flat. And so I thought that flat earth was almost this parable for describing how exactly people could believe whatever they wanted. And I thought there would be an interesting lens to go in and navigate that idea of belief and explore why people land where they do.
Yeah, and I think that lens that you're using, and I want to credit you for that because it is such a weird topic, and I'm sure you meet so many weird people, but you treat them and you write about them and describe them with this really nice touch of humanity and empathy, which takes a weird subject and makes it something that we can care about and that's something that we can relate to. So was that something you always wanted to do? Is that helpful for yourself in order to understand it?
I think so, because as I started researching not just flat earth, but conspiracy belief in general, I realized that this is something that we're all susceptible to. We all have certain conspiratorial tics, and certainly I'm not immune from that. And really, this is a pattern of thinking that emerges when we don't have enough information, or the information we have, we don't want to accept it. We want an alternative theory of what's happening. And so when I started understanding those broader motivations for belief, that made it a bit easier for me to talk to people, even when, we literally had nothing in the world in common. And so a combination of trying to understand, the emotional and psychological underpinnings of these beliefs, and also just spending a lot of time with them in person and keeping in touch on the phone, that, it, in talking about humanizing people are human. And, if you, especially if you step away from the internet, where I think we have these very flat pictures of people, it's hard not to start, coming away with a rounder picture of the people you're writing about.
Yeah, because I suppose as a reader of these things, it's often easy for us to get up on our high horse and think like that could never happen to me. And I mean, there have been studies that say that over 50% of Americans believe in some form of conspiracy theories. And personally, I'm not fully convinced that Finland exists. But so what do you think it is? Like, what is it in humans in general, like in all of us, that creates this need to believe these things?
I think we don't love uncertainty. And that makes sense, right? We're mid-sized apes, haven't been civilized for very long. I'm being a little reductive, but we don't love the idea that we can't understand things, or that events are out of our control. So conspiracy theories let us make order and sense out of what are otherwise unknowable circumstances. And I think that's a really logical impulse. I think it's a really human impulse. We go looking for these patterns, but unfortunately, often we overreach and we see a pattern where it doesn't exist.
Yeah, because I mean, I suppose it's easy to feel powerless in the face of so many things that's happening. COVID is one thing. There's just so much that makes you feel like you have no agency and that we're sort of just tethered to this, I'll say, round rock, sort of hurtling through space. And there's a real sense of powerlessness there. So I suppose people look for these things to feel empowered, right?
Absolutely. I'm really glad you brought up COVID because it was sort of a real time study in how uncertainty affects people's beliefs and affects people's ability to believe strange things. You know, I'm a mom, and early on in the pandemic, when there was very little useful information coming out of trusted institutions like the CDC or public health bodies at large, all the parenting groups that I was in kind of lost it. You know, they were looking for information, they were looking for a voice to explain what felt like a really chaotic situation. And in the absence of good information, they just started posting things from whatever blog was, was first to the beat and telling people that COVID was fake or that you could cure it with turmeric powder. And I think, yeah, we do look for some semblance of order, and often we'll prioritize that feeling of comfort over good information and sometimes over reality.
Do you find that sometimes conspiracy theories beget conspiracy theories? I mean, in the sense that your sources for this book, did you gauge their response to COVID, for instance? Were they more likely to believe that it was fake or there was something going on?
Absolutely. You know, it's funny because flat Earth is literally an entire worldview, right? If you accept that Earth is not the shape that you think it is, and that all the government and scientific institutions are colluding to hide that truth from you, then you can really believe a whole range of things. It really blows the doors off on reality. So I did find a lot of flat earthers getting very, very into COVID denialism. And tragic and immediate results of that was people who were preaching anti-vaccines information and just flat out denying that COVID existed. Well, multiple are now dead of COVID. So it's it's easy to talk about these phenomena as sort of abstract and systems of information, but they have real casualties.
Yeah, I don't want to. This is a small spoiler alert, but one of your characters in the book actually, like, his conspiracy beliefs end up killing him. So is it? I mean, I guess there's a real risk sometimes to believing in these things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so for folks who haven't read yet, this character is a man named Mike Hughes. He was an amateur rocket stuntman, and he believed that he could build a rocket and shoot himself high enough into space to take a picture of the Earth's curvature or lack thereof, and really finally get an answer that would satisfy people. And in February 2020, he was conducting not the launch that would prove it all, but an intermediate launch that was working his way up there, and it went tragically wrong. The rocket went sort of sideways. He died on impact, and it was a really upsetting episode for me. I mean, I'm certainly not the main character in this episode, but he was someone that I'd spoken to for over a year, and I personally liked. And it was it was kind of a wake-up call for me, because I knew that people did, they really did believe in flat earth, but there was almost an element of unreality about it for me. I wondered the extent to which they were sort of keeping themselves in the dark, to the extent to which they were maybe play acting a little bit. And I mean, this was literally a life or death situation. And it didn't need to happen.
No, it does seem, when I read it, I just thought this is such a waste, because he was, the way you describe him, a pretty smart guy and an interesting guy. And it was just, it's tragic, right? That, I mean, there are pictures of the Earth from space. He didn't need to go up and take his own pictures, but this deep, profound distrust in established truths seemed to have killed him. And we're seeing that all over. And did it get like, didn't you sometimes just want to shake these people?
A little bit. And it was frustrating, especially in this case, because you start to question as a journalist, what your involvement should be in a story like this. And if someone tells me, I'm going to go up in a rocket that I built in my garage with my buddy, that's worrying. And I did express that a little bit, but there was a degree to which I'm like, okay, well, this guy is, a free agent, frankly, he's old enough to be my dad, and I'm not really going to interfere much, or I'm not going to tell him what to do. And when I think you see the consequences, I don't think I could have talked him out of it, but it's very hard not to feel like I should have said more, if nothing else, than to say I'd done everything. So it's a weird place where you're trying to passively observe this community and this subject, and also you're getting to know these people, and you don't want harm to befall them.
But also you have to think that they've heard it before. I'm sure they've been warned before. And sometimes I find with these people who have sort of meet ideas outside the mainstream, that any sort of questioning of that or criticism will just lead them to think that they're onto something. They're onto a greater truth that you're trying to keep from them in a way. So like, I don't know what you could have done, right?
Yeah, I talked to a lot of Mike's friends and family after the fact. And, there is a little bit of doubt in some people's minds whether he was a genuine flat earther or not, the degree to which he was questioning it, or just going up to explore the explore the possibilities. But that is one thing everyone said, is that this was a man who was very set in at least in his belief in himself. And that, there was little talking him out of it. And, the less extreme version of that, of trying to dissuade someone, is that often when you try and debate a flat earther, for instance, they're going to wonder what your motive is. Why does this matter so much to you? And why are you, as a journalist or something like that, trying to interfere? So I've found it very difficult, because these debates often make people just sort of sink further into their own beliefs and not really want to be proven wrong in any respect.
Yeah, that's a big thing, obviously, with QAnon. But I suppose it holds for all kinds of conspiracy theories. People always wonder, like, how do we get people out of their beliefs, or how do we sort of nudge them out? Like, it's like what do we do with our uncle around the Thanksgiving table, right? So first of all, like, do you think there's something we can do about people who believe these, and just sort of nuts and bolts, like what's an easy way to prove that the world is round?
I mean, it's easy to prove Earth is round, because there are a ton of actually quite fun proofs that you can do. You can go to the beach and watch the sunset or rise, depending on which coast you're on.
But wouldn't the sun just slip under the rim of the Frisbee? Wouldn't that look the same?
No, and because you would think, right, but because a lot of flat earthers don't believe in outer space, so they don't think that the sun can go around in that way. They believe it's just going overhead, almost like a ceiling fan. So sunsets don't really work on their model. But yeah, just watching the sunset disproves flat Earth. And there are other things you can do. I mean, the way that shadows and star movements work, and the globe Earth does not work on the flat Earth. And of course, if you're willing to trust the pictures from NASA, we have plenty of very nice pictures and videos of Earth from above. But all that is to say that conspiracy belief isn't necessarily powerful because it's the most logical answer. It's powerful because it has this emotional appeal. We're talking about how it implies an alternate explanation. It implies order where people feel chaos. And so even if you bring up certain points of evidence, if someone is committed to believing, they're going to find a reason to dismiss that evidence. And so when we talk about how to deconvert someone or how to talk them out of it, I think it's important to remember that we're not really speaking to an evidence-based debate. It's more useful, I found, to try and speak to the emotional reasons that someone is involved in a conspiracy theory. And, the former flat earthers I've spoken with, the people who were in the theory and then left, said that the interactions that helped them leave were not debates, right? They were not a forum where they'd be proven wrong or right and potentially get humiliated. They were discussions with round earthers who had built relationships of trust with them and who had taken their interest to heart and shown that they cared about them. And then from there, introducing the evidence, and also I think introducing the idea that maybe the flat earth influencers that you are following, or the conspiracy bloggers that you're supporting on Patreon, that maybe those people don't have your best interests at heart. And that's another thing I think, is that conspiracy theories often act as a community. So what helps is to offer them an alternative, a real world community, or some supportive friendship, something that's replacing what the conspiracy theory offered them emotionally.
That's interesting. I was speaking to a professor called Professor Kruglansky at the University of Maryland, who was telling me that to talk to people who believe in conspiracy theories, or lies by another word, is like you got to replace one truth with another truth. You can't just like disprove it. But the problem to me there is that the conspiratorial worldview is oftentimes infinitely more interesting than the world in which we are living. I mean, take QAnon, for instance, like where you can either be a warrior for Christ and for light and goodness in like an end times battle against Satan and his minions, or you could be just like a guy who lives in Brooklyn and who has 2 kids and goes to work. And it's like, I kind of want to choose the other one, and it's the same with flat earth, I guess, right? It's a fascinating world to live in.
Yeah, I think, we were talking about how conspiracy theories offer this sense of stability, but I think they also offer a sense of adventure. QAnon especially, but flat earth, they present themselves as puzzles, right? People are looking for the next clue or the next piece of evidence. And I think for a lot of people that can be kind of alluring, that can be almost the gamification of it.
Yeah.
I think my answer to that, I don't know how satisfying this is for other people, but I think for me personally, there's something quite nice about embracing mundanity and smallness in the universe. That doesn't sound very compelling when I say it, but to kind of present 2 conflicting worldviews here. I remember being at a flat earth conference and a woman putting her belief very succinctly. She said that she was always upset about her place in what we understand as the either infinite or basically infinitely large universe. That she felt really small in this expanse. She felt kind of theologically neglected in it, that, that she didn't have a very personal relationship with God in this largeness. And then when flat earth compacted everything into this very finite snow globe-like shape, she did feel like it was smaller and she was special within that context. And I said, that's interesting, because I sort of like the idea of space. I like the idea of that exploration and that possibility. And so I don't know, there's got to be a reframing of it, like either acceptance of, no, you're not, this video game warrior, and that's okay. That's ideal for me. Or that, comfort in not knowing everything and kind of embracing the unknown.
Yeah. To me, the embracing the unknown is almost like an endorsement of flat earth, though, because like you, I love the fact that there's an infinite universe out there, but I'm not going to be an astronaut. I think, like, I'm still going to try, but like, I don't think they'll have me. But if you're telling me, like when you were explaining the various views of the flat earth, and you were telling me that there's like a mountainous ring surrounding the known earth where like maybe armies are, or God knows, like it's very much sort of here be monsters. I'm thinking that's a world I can get on board with, because we've seen all of the world now. But if you're telling me there's the unknown still, quite like that. And I guess I was saying, I get why some people find that alluring.
Absolutely. And it's funny, there have been people who in scam businesses that have banked on the allure of that kind of limited unknown. In the book, I document two scams that promised to take people to Antarctica, and these were heavily marketed in flat earth communities because people said, oh, for what, $10,000, I can finally do it. I can finally go see the ice wall. And they had all these conspiratorial add-ons saying the ice wall is pure energy. It's going to solve all your illnesses. And of course, these people cut and ran with the money. But that's all to say that that's a relatable impulse for a lot of people. If the world is kind of finite and you can go to the edge, well, why don't you?
Yeah. That brings me to something I wanted to talk to as well. When you so wonderfully write about all these people who came up with a theory and like the history of the flat earth theory, like a lot of it seems to be just like hucksters and snake oil salesmen who latch onto this theory, which is, of course, reminds me of Alex Jones of today, who uses his conspiracy platform just to peddle supplements and garbage. So there seems to be quite a prevalence of grift in conspiracy theories, and I was wondering if you could like shed some light on that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing for the audience that Vegas is alluding to is sort of the founder of the modern flat earth movement. Before he realized that that was good money, he was selling like almost like a trumped up Dr. Pepper, just this, bogus miracle cure that he said would, basically make you immortal. You couldn't really die of natural causes if you were drinking this regularly. And I think that miracle cures and conspiracy theories probably work for a lot of the same logical reasons. They're, in their way, beacons of hope for people. Just like you want to believe that there is a greater order to the world, or there's an explanation for things that you can figure it out and you'll be one of the privileged few who understand. Miracle cures say that you don't need to suffer. And not only that, they often say that you don't need to pay very much for your medicine. And that's very appealing, I think, in a world where medicine is okay, but very expensive. So it's a similar impulse, I think, to say, well, maybe there is this plot to hide the reality of the universe from me. And also to say, maybe there is a plot to hide the easy accessibility of a cancer cure. I think they're kind of two sides of the same coin. And I'm not really surprised that a lot of conspiracy theorists have also been, snake oil salesmen.
Do you find that, do most flat earthers believe that there's something nefarious afoot? Like, is there a segment who's just like, the earth is flat and we don't know why? Or like, do a lot of them believe that the government or someone else is trying to keep this from us?
Pretty much every flat earther I've met does believe that there's a nefarious element. It's interesting. I wonder if there are any very passive flat earthers, but I can't imagine how they would get very politically involved with the movement. Because a lot of these conspiracy theories don't just suggest that something isn't as it seems. They suggest that there is malice behind it, that there's a cover up, and that there's that cover up is actively harming people. So no, I've never met the neutral flat earther, but I can't imagine they'd be very active in the community. Instead, what I find are people who tie this to their prior political beliefs, or frankly, sometimes previously held bigotries. There's a bit of anti-Semitism in the movement. So, it is an open-ended theory enough that people can affix it to the political point that they wanted to make.
Yeah, which reminds me, you said recently that you kind of got into this when you discovered flat earthers on far right forums. Does the flat earth conspiracy theory belong somewhere on the political spectrum? Do you find like a lot of far right extremists buy into this kind of stuff? Is there an overlap there?
There is an overlap, and it's frustrating because there's no actual reason that flat earth needs to be political in any respect. It could just be an astronomical conspiracy theory. But what I find instead is that, well, first of all, we're in a movement where there is a lot of innate conspiracy mongering on the right. I think it's a function of how the party is structuring itself right now, the Republican Party, that is, with a lot of built-in mistrust. But one thing about flat Earth is it's always been a little bit reactionary. It's always been inherently anti-science, and to that end, using these anti-science arguments to reassert religion's role in the world. Just as an example, modern flat Earth theory really emerged in a moment when new natural sciences were taking a bigger foothold in conversation. So ideas like evolution were maybe superseding traditional expectations of, how people would think of themselves in relation to God and man's supremacy over animals, etc. All that's to say that flat Earth lets people discard science and put religion back in the driver's seat. And that's still, I think, very much a driving force of flat Earth today as it was in 1840. So it attracts a very evangelical crowd. And I think just the way that traditionally those demographics align is typically a more conservative crowd.
So this particular moment in time we're in right now feels like, I'm sure to a lot of us, like a buck wild time where truth has left the building and everything is kind of up for grabs. But I was talking to another professor, I'm sorry to name drop professor, this Professor Uzinski at the University of Miami, who's an expert on conspiratorial thinking. And he told me, he's been doing polls on this, and he says that there has been no increase in conspiratorial thinking in America since he began polling, basically. So he's saying there's no change. Now I look out the window, by which I mean my browser window, and I see just madness. So what do you think is happening to the world today? And please help us.
No, that's really interesting. So I do keep track of Professor Uzinski's work, and I also find it a little bit difficult to reconcile with exactly the role of conspiracy theories in, say, politics right now. And it's hard for me to sort of diagnose that without looking at his most recent methodology. One thing that he notes in his work is he traces conspiracy theories for like a century and a half, and he has really cool sources for doing this. But he seems to suggest, I think, maybe their commonality rather than the role that they play in politics, which is, I think, a lot harder to quantify. So I think people have always had this baseline conspiracism, right? Like we said earlier, it's a very natural human impulse. And I don't think that people are, evolutionally different now than they were 150 years ago. So it makes sense that we probably have the same capacity for it. I think what has probably changed and what might be harder to reflect in data is the way that conspiracy theories have become more central for the people who believe in them. Like I said, I mean, we've got the Republican Party has really embraced a lot of election denialism. And although I can't speak to every political moment, I think that is a much more central role for a conspiracy theory than there has been in the recent past. So that's one element. And I think that I think it's hard to exactly quantify how much people believe when there are political forces that center that belief. It's a roundabout answer, but it's something that I am grappling with because, as you say, you look out the window and I do seem to see more conspiracy influence in the world, but it is also possible that people have the same capacity for belief, but the people who believe right now are just louder and have more power.
Yeah. And I guess also, and we have to get into how the internet and social media works, sadly, but I guess also back in the day, your community were the people who happened to buy or rent houses next to wherever your house was in that particular area. So you had to deal with these people and you couldn't control who they were, what they thought. Whereas nowadays, we can kind of custom make our own communities online where we can have our beliefs validated and not criticized. So you could presumably live a happy, full life, if you can call it that, in the comfort of your own conspiracy theory, where you couldn't do that before, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think internet communities have really networked people who believe in conspiracy theories. Previously you might meet one other flat earther in passing, but now you can log on and meet 10,000 others. So that definitely, if it might not increase the overall number of flat earthers, although I actually know statistically in this case it has, but it does allow them to create a community and to strengthen that bond between them. And, thinking one more time about the appearance of greater conspiracy belief versus the actual numbers, I was thinking about the trucker convoy in Canada, right?
Mm.
And that was often for many participants, a little conspiracy driven. There was a lot of references to, say, QAnon in it. And it seemed massive, and it was a fairly large protest. But the reason it seemed so much bigger than it actually was because people were driving trucks, right? A truck is a very difficult thing to ignore, it blocks traffic. And when you get even 15 of those in one spot, it becomes this massive impediment. So I think in the digital age, we can have these concentrations of conspiracy theorists, and their existence in this pool makes them seem like a larger and more influential group than they would have in the past when they were dispersed.
Yeah, I'm sure. I know you know this, but we have, of course, our own convoy now, who is very upset that Ukraine is taking all their attention. But recently, they decided not to drive to DC because Biden would murder all of them, I think, single-handedly. So we have that going on. Just staying on the internet a little bit. We always get this question when you talk about extremism or conspiracy theories or disinformation. How important has the internet been in disseminating this stuff or recruiting, radicalizing? And have the platforms themselves done a good enough job to deal with it?
The short answer, at least with Flat Earth, is that they've done a lot to spread it. And you can point to the real moment that Flat Earth theory took off in the modern day. It's 2014. And that's when people started realizing that Flat Earth videos really overperformed in the YouTube algorithm. And that's the algorithm that recommends videos for you because it wants to keep you on the website, watching videos. And I think the reason conspiracy content played so well in that recommendation algorithm is because it's so sensational and it's so curiosity provoking that everyone, including me, is going to click on those videos at 2 a.m. when they're browsing around. And so that funneled Flat Earth into a lot of people's eyeballs. Almost every flat earther I meet says they converted based on YouTube when they weren't necessarily out looking for the theory. That said, I don't think we can fully blame tech for these issues. I mean, we've certainly had flat earth and other conspiracy theories before. And, to my earlier point that this conspiracism is handy for certain political movements, these beliefs are a lot more entrenched, I think, than just a tech company that enables that spread. And some social media companies have tried to fight back. YouTube in 2019 changed its algorithm after everyone was saying, stop promoting flat earth this much. And they did. And they made it a lot harder to accidentally stumble on those videos. And I mean, talk to any flat earth YouTuber, because I do that a lot. And they say that their viewership has just plummeted, that people aren't stumbling on these videos anymore. And it's taking a real hit. Of course, the theory still exists because it's not solely the fault of YouTube, but it was amplified by these social media sites and they can curb it a little bit. So
I think it's interesting, we do love to blame the algorithm for a lot of stuff because it does kind of take the onus off us a little bit. Like we get almost like us humans get portrayed as helpless in the face of the algorithm. And just the term that we use for falling into the rabbit hole makes us seem completely helpless and powerless as we just sort of tumble down. And I wonder if that's because it's more comfortable than to realize that conspiratorial beliefs, bigoted beliefs, racist, extremist beliefs is something that we all have the potential to have. It is innate in all of us. It's not just because you clicked on the wrong link that one time and then the algorithm had you forever.
Yeah, I think belief is a choice to a certain extent, definitely. And part of the reason I started questioning this metaphor of the rabbit hole, which you say it's a very passive construction, right? Gravity pulls you down. Oh, I'm just Alice in Wonderland, I'm lost. I started questioning that when I heard flat earthers invoke it a lot. They said, oh, I was just watching videos of 9/11 and then I fell down the flat earth rabbit hole. And I said, okay, if this is a useful metaphor for both of us, why is that? And I started interrogating it. And I think I came to a lot of the same conclusions that you just brought up. And I do still use the term sometimes because I think it's a vivid image. And yet I do think the rabbit hole implies a certain gravity and inevitability, and it takes away from the actual agency that people have in choosing their beliefs.
Yeah, it's like when people say they were red pilled, which is of course the metaphor for being politically radicalized. Like it's something that was done to you. You had no choice in the matter, and now all of a sudden you are a wild racist. Like it just lifts the blame comfortably off your shoulders and places it on something else, I think. I just wanted to talk quickly before we run out of time about the importance of community in this thing. Back when I used to cover Nazis and other bad people, I would go to skinhead rallies and I would go to, KKK stuff. And what I would always notice was the sense of camaraderie and the sense of community. And it almost seemed like the vile politics of it all was tangential, like they just wanted to belong. Now, when you go to these conspiracy conventions and when you talk to the people, how important is a feeling of community?
It's huge for them. I think conspiracy theories work not just as a belief, but as an identity, as an in-group. And we see this from a lot of research. People are more drawn to conspiracy theories when it implies a group or a community to which they can belong. It implies an identity. And that even makes sense within the logic of a conspiracy theory, right? We are a small group with a privileged set of information, and the world is out to suppress us in some way. So yes, community is really important to conspiracy theorists. And also, I think a lot of conspiracy theorists often distance themselves from their real world communities when they get very into these fringe beliefs. A lot of flat earthers feel alienated from their friends and family because, if you start talking about flat earth at the dinner table, people are going to start, maybe looking at you funny. So it's this push-pull effect of getting into this movement because it offers a sense of belonging, and then going in further because you need to replace the friends that you lost when you started talking about flat earth. So community is huge. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the more sort of insidious things that I read about in your book is when you take something that seems relatively harmless, like flat earthers, the Hughes' death notwithstanding, but it has a tendency, like you when you started describing that QAnon started coming into it, and it seems like there is with these things, is there a tendency to sort of seek toward extremes? Like, can you be burrowing deeper and deeper into this and going darker and darker places?
I think, yes, I think you can. I do think one conspiracy belief probably lends itself to the next because, if this foundational truth is actually a lie, well, what else is a lie? I also think there's probably some level of almost a dopamine hit of finding new information. I've never met a conspiracy theorist who just settles on flat earth and says, well, that's it. Thanks. I'm satisfied with this. They're always looking for the next clue. And so if you've really ingested all the flat earth information that you can find or that you're interested in, I think it makes sense to probably take a look around and see what else is in the field. And of course, conspiracy theorists are more than happy to preach their beliefs. So it's easy to stumble upon the next one.
What do we do when influential people, and I don't just mean the Alex Joneses influential within conspiracy theories, when legitimately influential people like athletes and celebrities start suddenly believing in flat earth? Like, what does that mean? I guess they're not immune either, but what do we do with that? And yeah, what's your take on that?
I think that's really challenging, and especially with real world celebrities, not just conspiracy world celebrities. I often find it difficult to tell how earnest they are. I think Kyrie Irving, right? He came out, the basketball player, he came out as a flat earther and walked it back because I think he was earnest in his belief, and he had enough people tell him, buddy, this doesn't look good. Like this, your merchandising thing is not going to go well if you're a flat earther. And people, I think, probably genuinely talked him out of this belief and showing him why it wasn't real. He said he found it via Instagram. But there are other conspiracy theorists who I think might be just promoting it cynically. Tila Tequila, the reality star, she's, made flat earth comments, and there's a very good chance she's doing it for attention because she does that kind of thing. But regardless of whether they're being genuine or not, I think it does legitimize the movement. It gives people a real self-esteem boost. And they say that, it's growing. And so I guess I would just, ask what I ask of everybody, just to be more critical of your sources, but especially for people with platforms, like if you're doing this as a joke, it's not funny. I know flat earth seems funny. But there are people who have either literally lost their lives or really sunk their whole identities into this theory. And when you muck around in that, it does affect them in ways that I think are detrimental.
Yeah, and one thing can touch on the other. Like if you're questioning the science of gravity, then who's to say the science behind the vaccine is great, right? Like if you can't even figure out the damn shape of the planet we're on, how can we pretend to make a vaccine that's effective? So I guess these things sort of can feed each other.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's these theories don't end in one spot. They definitely do talk to each other and overlap and cross recruit.
Yeah, I'm going to take a couple of audience questions, and one thing I want to sort of encourage from the audience, which might be fun, is if you guys also believe in some kind of conspiracy theory, no matter how innocuous it is, I would just personally love to hear it. So if you guys believe in it, just let me know. We have some. So this is an audience member who actually has a flat earther for a brother. His brother is a flat earth believer. So he has some questions, and they might get a little technical, but let's try to help him out. So let me see. The changing night sky, i.e. constellations, the position of identifiable stars and planets. So does the flat earth frisbee disc, does it spin or does it orbit? Does it move? Is it static? Like, how does a solar system work?
So most flat earthers will say that Earth is completely stationary, and that when you see the movement of stars or the sun or the moon, it's because they're orbiting over the top. It's like hands on a clock going over the flat face. And this taps into a supposed proof of flat Earth, which is not a proof, but it does lure people in. And they'll say, if we're really moving this fast that you can see the sun, go around, why don't we feel it? And the answer is very simple. Gravity holds us on the sphere. We're moving at a constant rate, and you don't feel that because it's not a changing rate. But they do say that it's flat, and that the sun and the moon are these little points of light in the sky, or they say it's stationary rather.
So you wouldn't feel it any more than you would feel the speed of a car when you're moving at a steady pace.
That's right, because you are, you're moving at a steady pace, your body is acclimated to it. And so unless Earth decided to, chuck it in reverse, which would be pretty catastrophic, you're not going to feel anything.
Yeah. It's quite like a solipsistic worldview, isn't it? I mean, I guess kind of literally. And I guess maybe it goes back to we want to be in the center of things. We don't want to be in the middle of it, or not in the middle, or somewhere lost in a giant universe. We like the idea that existence is centered in a way around us and what we can see and what we can hold and touch.
Absolutely. I was at one flat earth conference where they're like, okay, we'll debate a round earther. And they brought him up, and he was a conspiracy theorist who believed earth was round, but that sun orbited earth. So it's a more popular desire than you might think.
Another question is, are conspiracy theorists religious, or did the conspiracies themselves they believe in take the place of religion?
I don't think conspiracy theorists necessarily need to be religious, but many of the theories that I examine are. And I don't think they take the place of religion. I think they supplement it. A lot of flat earthers are biblical literalists, and they will go through the Bible and they will cherry pick not just references to the firmament, which is what they call the dome over the earth, but really any reference to a circle they get very excited about. So it's a very, very weird read. And I'm not a religious person either. So my understanding of religion is like very flat earth shaped now, because of that's just been for a couple of years my most sustained engagement with it. But yeah, I think it's almost like an add-on to certain people's religious beliefs. They think that, yes, all the established points of Christianity, and that God made this flat planet with a dome, and that scientific authority is trying to conceal that, and they're trying to take your religion from you.
One thing that I always find interesting and frustrating when I'm talking to people who have a very, like, they're dedicated to one issue, is that they have a lot of information on that one issue. Whether or not that information is true is debatable, but like they're very well armed. Whereas I'm just like a dummy floating around, and like I'm not. That's why they always want to debate you, right? Because they have all the facts or whatever they believe them to be. Did you ever think like, what if they're right? Like, or what if I'm wrong?
Not in the case of flat Earth. I'm pretty convinced at this point Earth is round. But I've had that kind of argument levied against me, and it's interesting, and you can see how it would work against people. You know, someone asked me like, okay, you think Earth is orbiting the sun? How fast does that go? I don't know that. Why would I memorize that?
Exactly.
But for some people, that inquiry is like a moment of pause, and they say, well, I guess I don't know. What else don't I know? And that opens the discourse up to doubt, I think.
Yeah. It's like when you talk to creationists, and they say, well, what do you think of this? And they mention some little small amoeba-like creature that I've never heard of. And I have to say, like, I don't know. And then they go, well, there you have it.
Right. And that's not so much of comprehensive knowledge as it is memorization. You know, it's like trying to debate the merits of, I don't know, what's a musical genre with a lot of fans? K-pop, which I'm sure is fine. I just don't know anything about it. But if I were to say, it doesn't do anything for me, a whole bunch of K-pop stans on Twitter would come and say, you haven't watched this music video. And it's rote memorization and almost fandom versus, sort of a layman's understanding of a broad subject.
Another question. How big is the flat Earth community? Do we have a sense of how many people believe this stuff?
We don't have hard numbers, which is frustrating. We do have some polling that I think is a little suspect. It's not, I think, a great sample. They were indicating about 1%, and this was across multiple polls. Again, there's reason to doubt that polling, because I think certain people, when asked a ridiculous question about flat Earth, are going to answer facetiously. What I can tell you, though, is that I've been in flat Earth conferences where there are 600 flat Earthers there in person. And this is not a cheap conference. This is something with $200, $300 tickets, not including, airfare, not including hotel stays. So this is not a small movement. It's never going to be as big as, say, vaccine hesitancy, which has, I think, a much larger appeal and is always going to have a larger audience. but 600 flat earthers in a room is too many, is what I'm going to say. And this is it does have a large draw. There have been flat earth Facebook groups with 100,000 members before they had ban issues. So it's large.
There's a question here that I take issue with it, and I'll tell you why. So the question is this: why don't flat earthers follow the principle of Occam's razor, that the simplest explanation of something is the most likely? Now, my issue is that I've tried to read astrophysics, and so to me, the simplest explanation is that the Earth is flat. Like if you're saying look out to the horizon, it looks flat, and then give me a brief history of astrophysics, I'm going to choose the flat one. But that was me being facetious. What do you like? Why do people hear hoofbeats and think zebras, I guess?
I think there is something to what you just said there, where yes, to us who, accept the globe, that does seem like the most reasonable answer. You have to construct all these just ornate lies to cover up the globe. But I think the other way to spin it, which makes flat earth seem a more logical answer, is to kick it back to the guy who founded modern flat earth theory, and this was 1840s. He had what he called zetetic science. It was a rebuttal to evidence-based science, and he said you should only believe what you can personally confirm for yourself, what you can observe with your own eyes. And I think on principle that probably sounds nice. And for a lot of people that is a workable scientific method, but it doesn't actually hold up in principle, right? Because you and I are speaking and we're not in the same room. And I'm assuming that you're not some kind of projection or something like that. You're not an AI, you're actually there, but I can't prove it. And so I think we need to have some space for doubt, right? And when you have these fake sciences that say only believe what you can personally confirm, that doesn't introduce a good critical way of evaluating evidence. It just sort of flattens the scientific process. And to try and summarize that, because it's a bit of a roundabout way of approaching it, flat earth uses a fake scientific model that proposes that you should only believe what you can see with your own eyes. And what you can see with your own eyes does look flat. So for people who want to believe the easiest possible solution, it is there for them. They do have to discard most of the other known facts, but it's easy if you narrow your scope enough to believe flat earth.
It's the do your own research, right? Like
it's absolutely,
which means that you won't trust scientists, but you'll believe something some guy posted on YouTube. All right, we have another good question here, which is the chicken and which is the egg here. So do these theories appeal mostly to people who are already somewhat isolated, perhaps don't get along with their families, for example, or do the theories themselves make them isolated?
It's a really good question. I'm not sure there is a single model flat earther. I do think that there is often an initial degree of isolation that people experience when they go looking for conspiracy theories, because again, they are looking for a certain sense of belonging and community in many cases. So I would probably posit that there's some isolation that occurs before conspiracy belief, but it's not necessarily true in every case, at least. We are, like I said, all somewhat susceptible to conspiracy thinking, and certainly the isolation that comes from a conspiracy theory and the in-group sense of belonging to a conspiracy movement does help pull people further in. So it's self-perpetuating.
Okay, we got another question. So, and it came up when we were talking about Kyrie Irving and other famous people. Does it relate to, in the same way that actors in Scientology sort of interact together? Is there a similarity there?
It's interesting. I don't think flat Earth is big enough to to compete with like the the influence of Scientology in Hollywood, at least as I understand it. But I think it is sometimes useful to think about conspiracy theories as not exact cults, but something maybe a little bit similar psychologically. I was speaking with this expert who helps people exit cults, and she said that conspiracy belief falls under the same rubric because it has this strong community component and it tells people to cut off their information from the outside world. It says that the outside world is trying to delude them, and that to stay well informed and to stay protected, they need to stay within this group. So I know the question was about celebrity. And again, I don't know that flat Earth is quite large enough, at least in celebrity communities, to function exactly as a Scientology would. But I think for the layman, it sort of does, even though it doesn't maybe have that exact charismatic leader or an official organization demanding dues.
Okay. We have one more question that I want to sort of fold into like my final. I just wanted to the people on this call, I just want to like give a ringing, like just read this book. It is like, it'll really help you understand what is happening in this weird world right now. But it's also just an incredibly fun and well written page turner. Really, it's very, very cool. And with that, I'll kick it to this question. So how should we take the lessons of your book to understand the widespread political conspiracies that are believed by all kinds of people, including well-educated folks and people that we've known our whole lives? Like we're alluding to things like QAnon these days, but like what lessons can we draw from your good book?
I think maybe the broadest lesson here is that people believe what they want to. They're not necessarily believing something because it's the most evidence supported. They believe it because it helps them further a political aim they wanted, or something they wanted to believe about themselves. And that to remove them from that belief is not always a matter of debate as much as it is addressing underlying issues. So when it comes to addressing conspiracy theories in our politics, often these theories are excuses for policies that people wanted to promote. We push an election conspiracy theory. The real tangible damage there is, new bills that are curtailing people's ability to vote, particularly, curtailing the availability of voting places in predominantly Black neighborhoods. So I think the conspiracy theory about Biden doing voter fraud, which is nonsense, it doesn't seem so much like it's related to how people are voting in the next city, but it can actually be related to those paranoias. And I think we need to have a more holistic diagnosis of why people are believing these things, what they're actually seeking comfort from, and maybe trying to treat that underlying issue.
I was kind of hoping for just like a quick fix. So I don't know, but
you can try like swinging a yo-yo in front of their eyes and doing
Thank
the
you.
hypnosis
That's what I was trying
It's
to
never
get
worked
at.
for me, but if it works for you, let me know.
Yeah. Well, we've been at this for an hour and it's been really, really, really fun to pick your brain.
Yeah, thank you so much, Vegas.
And there were lots of questions in the Q&A we unfortunately weren't able to get to, but I can promise you the book is incredible and many of your questions are answered in the book. So I highly encourage you to grab your copy of Kelly Weill's Off the Edge, Flat Earthers, Conspiracy Culture, and Why People Will Believe Anything. You can do that from Atlanta History Center's online museum shop. But just Vegas and Kelly, just want to thank you again so much for just such a wonderful conversation. The hour absolutely flew by. And just thank you for sharing your insight and your work with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
And to everyone on the call tonight, if you enjoyed tonight's conversation, we have a lot more activities coming up, some virtual, some in person. Our next virtual talk is with Adolph Reed Jr. He will be talking about his new book, The South, Jim Crow and Its Afterlives. Registration for that is available at atlantahistorycenter.com, and that will be on March 16th. And yeah, quick note, we're running a little low on Kelly's book, actually, which is a wonderful problem to have. So if you go to buy your copy and you find it sold out, my email is in the chat, and we will make sure that your discount gets honored. Thanks again, everyone, and have a wonderful evening.